The evening began in the most ordinary way. I was lounging on the couch, mindlessly flipping through TV channels, when I heard the faint groan of the front door opening. Lisa stepped in, her face unusually flushed, strands of her ponytail escaping in a way that looked more hurried than casual. She mentioned, almost offhandedly, that she'd gone out for a quick walk to clear her thoughts. Her sneakers hit the floor with a dull thud as she kicked them off near the doorway, and she hung her jacket on the banister with a jerky motion. Her breath was uneven, like she'd been rushing, or maybe just exerting herself. "Good walk?" I asked, my tone light but my ears tuned to her response. My eyes stayed on the TV, but my attention was fixed on her. "Aha," she replied, her voice too nonchalant to feel natural. She grabbed a soda from the counter and cracked it open, taking a sip while keeping her back to me. "Just needed to get out for a bit." Something about the scene prickled at me. A faint, unfamiliar scent clung to the air, sharp and invasive. Cheap cologne? Beer? I couldn't quite place it, but it was wrong, out of sync with what I expected. My gaze followed her as she made her way toward the bedroom, her steps quicker than usual, almost purposeful. "I'm jumping in the shower," she said over her shoulder, not even bothering to turn around. I nodded absently, but a subtle unease settled over me. I considered getting up, maybe beating her to the shower, but ultimately decided to wait until she was done. No rush, I told myself. Minutes later, she reappeared, her damp hair twisted into a towel. "Bathroom's free," she said without looking my way, already halfway into the bedroom. The mattress creaked faintly as she settled down. I made my way to the bathroom, tugging off my shirt as I walked. Everything seemed routine at first, until my eyes caught something peeking out of the pocket of her jeans, which had been tossed carelessly into the laundry basket. A strip of fabric was sticking out, crumpled and damp. It was her underwear. Damp, shoved into the pocket of her jeans in a way that seemed deliberate but rushed. I frowned and ran my fingers over the inside of the denim. It was wet, too. The fabric felt cold and clung uncomfortably to my hand. My mind reeled, grasping at explanations that wouldn't come. I stood there, jeans in hand, my thoughts colliding in a storm of disbelief and suspicion. The damp fabric told a story all on its own, one I hadn't asked to hear. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the implications stared back at me, undeniable and stark. Carefully, I dropped the jeans back into the basket, my chest tight with unspoken tension. In the quiet, I could hear the faint sounds of her shifting on the bed, the creak of the mattress punctuating the silence. She was just a few feet away, close enough for confrontation, but I hesitated. It wasn't fear stopping me. It was something else, something heavier. I needed more than just accusations hurled in anger. I needed clarity, real answers that couldn't be dodged or dismissed. For now, I left the bathroom and headed to the bedroom, each step weighted with questions I wasn't yet ready to ask. I stepped into the bedroom, trying to control the rush of adrenaline coursing through me. Lisa lay on the bed, scrolling aimlessly through her phone, her expression calm, too calm. For a moment, I considered walking back out, pretending I hadn't noticed anything. But then the image of her damp jeans in the laundry, the sharp scent of cologne, and the undeniable evidence flashed through my mind. There was no pretending now. "Lisa," I said, my voice steady but sharp enough to pierce the tension in the room. "Care to explain what happened to your jeans?" Her hand paused mid-scroll, fingers frozen above the screen. "What?" she asked, glancing up at me with wide eyes, feigning confusion. I took a step closer to the bed, crossing my arms. "The jeans you threw in the laundry. Something doesn't add up." Her brows knit together in what looked like an attempt at innocence. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her tone measured but unconvincing. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Really? You don't know?" My voice hardened as I leaned in slightly. "You go for a walk, come back looking like you've been sprinting across town, and now your jeans tell a completely different story." Her mouth opened slightly as if she was about to reply, but no words came out. She was stalling, scrambling to come up with something to say. Before she could regain her footing, I snatched her phone right out of her hands. "Hey!" she shouted, sitting upright and reaching for it, but I stepped back, keeping it out of her grasp. "Ah," I said mockingly, shaking my head. "You've had plenty of time with this. Now let's see what you've been so busy with." Her face paled. "Give it back. You can't just take my phone." "Oh, I can," I said coldly. "And I will." My thumb hovered over her messages, and despite her frantic protests, I began scrolling. It didn't take long. One name jumped out at me like a beacon. Nick. I opened the chat, and the truth spilled out in bold text, line after damning line. "He has no idea. Tonight was perfect. Can't wait to see you again." I kept reading, my chest tightening with every word. There were photos, too, nothing overtly explicit, but intimate enough to send a surge of anger through me. My hands trembled as I turned the phone toward her. "Well," I said, my voice cold and sharp, "looks like your little walk wasn't as innocent as you made it seem. Care to explain who Nick is?" Her face turned ashen. "It's not what it looks like." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't insult my intelligence. It's exactly what it looks like. And you know what? Let's get his side of the story, shall we?" Before she could stop me, I hit the call button next to Nick's name. The phone rang once, twice, and then a man's voice answered. "Hello. Nick, is it?" I said, my tone deceptively calm. "This is Lisa's husband. Care to tell me what's been going on between you two?" There was a long pause. Then, without another word, he hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment, then let out a bitter chuckle. Figures. Coward. I tossed the phone onto the bed, but before Lisa could grab it, I snatched it back. "Not so fast," I said, my voice like steel. "You don't get this back until I've taken screenshots of every last one of these messages. And after that, I'll be combing through every app, every photo, every file." "You think this is just betrayal?" "No, Lisa, this is evidence, and I'm going to need it when I file for divorce." Her lips moved as if to protest, but no sound came out. I didn't wait for her to find her words. Methodically, I began taking screenshots of every incriminating text and image, ignoring her frozen silence. When I was done, I placed the phone on the dresser, far out of her reach. I turned to the door, pausing only to deliver a final blow. "You'd better figure out where you're sleeping tonight," I said without looking back. "Because it won't be here." I walked out, closing the door behind me. My pulse thundered in my ears, my hands still trembling, but for the first time that night, my mind felt clear. This wasn't an ending. It was the start of something I couldn't ignore any longer. There was no turning back. I sat on the couch in the living room, phone in hand, scrolling through Lisa's messages. Every new line of text was like a punch in the gut, but I forced myself to keep going. My focus stayed razor sharp. I couldn't let anger or disbelief derail me. Evidence. That was all that mattered now. If Lisa thought she could talk her way out of this, she was sorely mistaken. The truth was there, black and white, preserved in screenshots I'd make sure she could never deny. Footsteps padded softly behind me, and before I could turn, Lisa stumbled into the living room. Her face was blotchy, streaked with tears, her breathing uneven. She looked desperate, unsteady, like someone grasping for anything to hold on to. "Please," she started, her voice trembling. "Just listen to me. You've misunderstood. I can explain." I didn't bother looking at her. My thumb swiped across the phone screen, capturing another screenshot. "Misunderstood," I echoed dryly. "You mean those texts about how tonight was amazing and how I don't suspect a thing?" "Yeah, Lisa, I'm just dying to hear how I've got this all wrong. Please, enlighten me." Her shoulders shook as fresh tears spilled down her face. She took a step closer, wringing her hands. "It's not what you think," she insisted, her voice cracking. "Those messages, they don't mean anything." "There." I cut her off. finally lifting my eyes to meet hers. "Oh, don't you dare," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't insult me by saying they don't mean anything. You went out, you did whatever the hell you wanted, and then you came back here and lied to my face. Don't act like I'm too stupid to connect the dots." Her lips trembled as she tried to speak again, but before she could, I stood up, still gripping her phone. "You know what? Let's talk about Nick. Should I call him back? Maybe he'd like to explain why he's sending you those sweet little messages." "Stop," she cried, her voice rising in panic. "Please, just stop. It's not like that. It was a mistake, I swear." I let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. "A mistake?" "A mistake, Lisa, is forgetting to turn off the coffee pot. A mistake is losing your keys. What you did, that's not a mistake. It's a choice. A deliberate, selfish, disgusting choice." Her face twisted with pain at my words, but instead of backing down, she changed tactics. "You don't understand," she shouted, her voice growing louder. "You're always so busy with work, so distracted with your own life. You never make time for me anymore. I felt invisible." I laughed again, shaking my head. "Ah, there it is. The 'it's your fault I cheated' excuse. Classic." My tone dripped with sarcasm as I continued. "Let me be crystal clear, Lisa. You didn't cheat because I was busy. You didn't cheat because you were lonely. You cheated because you're selfish. Don't try to pin this on me." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, her tears flowing freely now. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, her voice breaking. I wasn't thinking." "No," I said coldly. You weren't. You weren't thinking about me, about us, or about anything but yourself. And you know what, Lisa? I'm done. I'm done with your lies, your excuses, all of it." Her sobs turned into a wail as she dropped to her knees. "Please," she begged, her hands pressed together as if she were praying. "Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. I'll do anything. Just forgive me. Please." I stared down at her, disgusted. The sight of her like this, broken, desperate, might have once softened me, but not now. Not after everything. I shook my head slowly. "Forgive you," I said, my voice quiet but full of venom. "You must think I'm a fool. This isn't just some little mistake I can sweep under the rug. You betrayed me, Lisa. You killed everything we built together. And now, you're going to face the consequences." Her tear-streaked face crumpled as she realized there was no turning this around. "At least let me stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just for now. I have nowhere else to go." I sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of my nose as I weighed her words. As much as I wanted her out of the house, I couldn't bring myself to throw her out into the night. Not yet. "Fine," I said finally, my voice hard and unyielding. "You can stay. But don't think for a second this changes anything. You'll find somewhere else soon enough." She nodded quickly, wiping her face with trembling hands. "Thank you," she mumbled, her voice hollow. I turned away from her, heading toward the guest room. "Oh, and Lisa," I called over my shoulder. "Don't even think about touching your phone. I've already got everything I need, and if you delete a single thing, it'll just make this worse." I didn't wait for her reply. I walked into the guest room, shut the door, and locked it behind me. The silence enveloped me, heavy and suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone still in my hand, my mind racing. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, they all swirled together, threatening to overwhelm me. But underneath it all, there was something else. A sense of finality. This was it. There was no coming back from this. No apologies, no promises, no amount of tears could fix what she'd done. I had no idea what came next, what the next day, the next week, the next chapter of my life would look like. But one thing was certain, Lisa was no longer a part of it. As I sat there, staring at the phone, I made a silent vow to myself. I would move forward, no matter how hard it was. I wouldn't let her betrayal define me. And most importantly, I wouldn't let her drag me down with her. For the first time that night, I felt something close to peace. This wasn't the end I had envisioned for us, but it was an end nonetheless. And with every breath I took, I knew I was ready to face it. I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, staring blankly at the wall as Lisa's phone sat beside me like a grenade with the pin pulled. The night's events replayed in my head, each moment cutting deeper than the last. Her words, her lies, and the damning evidence of her betrayal were stuck on an endless loop, pulling me further into the storm of anger and hurt I couldn't escape. The anger burned hottest at first. It surged through me, raw and unrelenting, making my chest feel tight, like it might explode. How dare she? After all the years we'd spent together, the sacrifices I'd made, the trust one had placed in her. This is how it ends? Thrown away for some guy who didn't even have the guts to stay on the line when I called? I thought of Nick, his smug texts, and the fact that he had the nerve to encroach on my marriage. But the rage wasn't for him. It was for her. She was the one who'd broken us, the one who had lied, the one who had made the choice to betray me. I clenched my fists so tightly my knuckles ached. The guest room, small and nondescript, felt like a prison cell. The air was heavy, oppressive, and the walls seemed to close in with every breath I took. I tried to calm myself, to focus on anything else, but the images of Lisa with him invaded every corner of my mind. The laughter they must have shared, the private moments stolen behind my back, it was all too much. The trust we'd built over the years had been shattered, and all I could think was, how could I have been so blind? But as the anger began to cool, something heavier and colder took its place. Sadness. The weight of what I had lost hit me like a tidal wave, dragging me under. I thought about the life we'd built together, the shared milestones, the moments that had once felt unshakable. Lazy Sundays spent in bed, our secret jokes, the way she'd smile at me from across a crowded room. I'd loved her with everything I had, trusted her with parts of myself no one else had ever seen. And now it felt like all of that had been reduced to ash, swept away by her choices. I buried my face in my hands, letting out a shuddering breath. How had it come to this? What had gone so wrong between us that she felt the need to turn to someone else? It wasn't just the cheating that broke me. It was the realization that everything I thought I knew about us had been a lie. The foundation of our marriage, the love we'd shared, the promises we'd made, it all felt hollow now. I tried lying down, but the bed felt hard and unwelcoming, and the pillow only seemed to amplify the whirlwind in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her in the other room, just a few feet away. Was she crying, regretting what she'd done? Or was she still thinking about him, about Nick, about the life she'd started carving out for herself behind my back? The thought of her texting him again, even now, made my stomach churn. The idea of staying under the same roof as her felt unbearable. I couldn't take it anymore. The stillness of the room, the weight of the silence, it was suffocating. I shot up from the bed and began pacing, my thoughts circling the same dark places. She betrayed me. She lied to me. She destroyed everything. The anger started to rise again, bubbling under the surface, until I couldn't hold it back any longer. I stormed out of the guest room, my footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. The hallway stretched ahead of me, each step amplifying the fury coursing through me. When I reached the bedroom, I didn't hesitate. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open with a sharp motion. Lisa was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked up at me, her expression pleading, but I didn't give her the chance to speak. "This isn't working," I said flatly, my tone devoid of warmth. Her lips quivered, but I pressed on. "I can't do this. I can't stay here with you, Lisa. Being under the same roof as you, it makes me sick. You've destroyed everything we had, and now you want me to just sit here and pretend like it's fine? That it's something I can forgive." "I said I was sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Sorry. I repeated, my voice sharp with disbelief. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Oh, well, that fixes everything, doesn't it? You cheat on me, lie to me, betray me, and all it takes is a sorry to make it better. Amazing. Her tears came faster, and she broke into a full sob. Please, she said, her voice trembling. I know I messed up, but you can't just throw us away. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I stared at her, my expression hard as stone. You think I'm the one throwing us away? I said, my voice low but deadly. No, Lisa. You threw us away the moment you decided to go to him. The moment you lied to me. This isn't something we can fix. You made your choice, and now you get to live with it. She started crying harder, her hands covering her face. I don't have anywhere to go, she choked out. Just let me stay for now. Please. I crossed my arms, glaring down at her. Fine, I said after a long pause. You can stay for a few days. But don't mistake this for forgiveness. Don't think for a second this means I'll forget what you've done. She nodded weakly, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I stood in the hallway for a moment, leaning against the wall as I tried to steady my breathing. The house was silent, but it felt heavy, oppressive, like it was suffused with the weight of her betrayal. This wasn't the life I'd planned. It wasn't the life I deserved. And yet, here I was, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces of something I hadn't broken. One thing was certain, though. Lisa had no place in the future I was building. She had destroyed us, and there was no coming back from that. Now, it was up to me to figure out what came next. Alone. I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, staring at the ceiling while muffled sounds from the other side of the house seeped through the walls. The thud of drawers opening and closing, the rustle of clothes being stuffed into bags. It all formed a strange rhythm, one that seemed to echo the slow, inevitable unraveling of everything we once had. Lisa was packing. The reality of it settled over me in waves. She was leaving, and I wasn't going to stop her. Part of me wondered if she hoped I'd burst into the room and beg her to stay. Maybe she thought the sound of her packing would trigger some last-minute regret or guilt. But pity wasn't on the table. Regret. That ship had sailed. She'd made her choice when she sent those texts, when she went to meet Nick, when she came home and tried to look me in the eye with lies on her lips. And now, for once, she was doing the right thing, leaving. I lay back and tried to sleep, but the effort was pointless. My mind refused to quiet, replaying every word, every tear, every excuse from the past 24 hours. Her betrayal felt like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, and the anger simmering beneath it all kept me wide awake. The nerve of her, trying to shift the blame onto me, as though her actions were somehow justified because I'd been distracted or busy. It was laughable. If her logic wasn't so twisted, it might have been funny. The anger, however, wasn't enough to drown out the pain. It lingered, sharp and heavy, like a weight pressing on my chest. I wasn't just grieving the loss of her. I was grieving the loss of everything we'd built together. Or maybe, the illusion of it. The Sunday mornings we spent wrapped in blankets, the inside jokes that felt like our own private language, the plans we made for a future that would now never exist. How much of it had been real? How long had I been blind to what was happening right in front of me? By the time the early light of dawn began filtering through the blinds, I gave up on the idea of sleep. The house was quiet now, the sounds of packing replaced by an eerie stillness. I didn't know if Lisa had finished and gone already, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I rolled out of bed, rubbed my face with my hands, and made my way to the kitchen. Lisa was standing there by the counter, a bag slung over her shoulder, her posture slumped with exhaustion. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She looked like a shell of the person I'd once loved, but the sight didn't move me the way it might have a day ago. I'm going to stay with a friend for a while, she said softly, barely meeting my eyes. I reached for the coffee pot and poured myself a cup, the sound of liquid filling the mug louder than her voice. I didn't even glance at her. "Good," I said flatly, taking a sip. "Have fun." She shifted on her feet, her bag bumping against the counter as though she didn't know what to do next. "Is that all you have to say?" she asked, her voice cracking under the weight of her own emotions. I set the mug down and finally looked at her, letting the silence between us stretch until it became unbearable. "What exactly do you want me to say, Lisa?" I asked, my tone razor-sharp. "Don't go, I can't live without you? Or maybe, hey, tell Nick I said hi?" "Sorry, I'm all out of things to say." Her shoulders sagged, and she stared down at the floor. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she mumbled, her voice so small it was barely audible. "And yet, here we are," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the tension. "You didn't mean to? Really? You didn't mean to text him? You didn't mean to meet him? You didn't mean to lie to me every step of the way? You can save your excuses, Lisa, because I'm done listening." Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she just looked at me with tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice breaking completely. "I'm so sorry." I shook my head, my anger turning into something colder, more final. "Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done. You broke this, Lisa. You destroyed us. And now you get to live with that." She nodded, her hands trembling as she adjusted the strap on her bag. Without another word, she turned and walked to the door. The soft click of it closing behind her was like a release, the sound cutting through the air and leaving behind an unexpected quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly alone. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee as it grew cold. The silence was strange, but it didn't feel heavy or oppressive. It felt freeing. Lisa was gone, and with her went the lies, the betrayal, the weight of trying to hold together something that had already fallen apart. The house felt empty, yes, but it was the kind of emptiness that made space for something new. By mid-morning, I'd made up my mind. I picked up the phone and started making calls. The first one was to a divorce lawyer. I didn't want to drag this out any longer than necessary. The second call was to the bank, beginning the process of separating our finances. It was tedious, sure, but it felt good to be taking control of my life again. The rest of the day passed in a blur of paperwork and logistics, but I didn't mind. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was moving forward instead of treading water. By the time night rolled around, I found myself sitting in the living room, the hum of the fridge the only sound in the house. I thought about everything that had happened, everything that was still to come. The sadness lingered, sure. It wasn't easy to let go of someone you'd built a life with, even when they'd betrayed you. But there was also relief. I wasn't trapped anymore, bound by lies and broken promises. I could finally breathe. As I stared out the window, the realization hit me. Lisa's betrayal wasn't the end of the world. It was the end of a chapter, one I was more than ready to close. Tomorrow, I'd wake up to a new beginning. The house would be quiet, the air would feel lighter, and for the first time in a long time, I'd know exactly where I stood. And that was something I could live with.